This one was sent in to cornydrivethrough@gmail.com from Tommy Howlett. 2 questions for you. I was reading the Wrestling Observer's 5-star matches list and noticed one Smoky Mountain Wrestling match on there. Brian Lee, Jimmy Golden, Robert Fuller, and the Rock and Roll Express versus Kevin Sullivan, Killer Kyle, the Tasmaniac, and the Heavenly Bodies. I was just wondering if you also think this is the best Smoky Mountain Wrestling match ever, and any other thoughts you have about the match. Also, his second question, Jimmy Golden. Always was a fan of his and was wondering if you can give any thoughts on the former Bunkhouse Buck as a worker and how he was backstage.
Oh, God. Well, Jimmy he's kind of just like Ron and Robert Fuller because they're cousins anyway. He's tall, he's country, he's got that voice. He could work his ass off. He was easy for me to deal with. He's been in business at that time for fucking 25 years since he was a teenager. And I'll never, the first night when he came in as a single, because Jimmy lived in the area and we knew we were going to use him and try to get Robert in and et cetera and reform the team. So I wanted to put him over on TV. I said, Jimmy, what do you do for a finish? He said, well, I throw a pretty good drop kick. I'm like, oh, okay. All right. Whoever it was, job guy, might have been Ben Jordan. Why does that stand out like they had anyway? Jimmy finally ends up stopping his babyface job guy's comeback and shooting him off and hitting him with a drop kick. It knocked him into fucking Sevierville from Knoxville. It was fucking brutal. It just reversed his direction and his kids had to be born dizzy. I said, all right, that's the way you use drop kick for a finish. That was Jimmy's finish. Every time he had a single match was a drop kick. But anyway, I think it got 5 stars from whoever it got 5 stars from. It was an angle. It was maybe the 5-star angle. It was what we set up, the blow off between me and Bob Armstrong that drew the record house, even though the match itself did not draw the record house. It was booked particularly for that angle. So no, there were better matches. Rock and Roll, Heavenly Bodies, Loser Leave in Pikeville at the Bluegrass Brawl. Tracy and the White Boy in the Chain match at the previous year's Bluegrass Brawl in 93. Bodies and Rock and Roll was 94. Shawn Michaels and Buddy Landel was hard to beat at Super Bowl 95. There were a number of matches that were better as wrestling matches, but for the angle and the fucking response and the way everybody played it up and then the business that we did off of it, that was a 5-star deal. And basically it was it was a Rage in the Cage deal where the Bodies had been feuding with both the Stud Stable and the Rock and Roll Express. The Studs were kind of heels too because they had feuded with the Rock and Roll Express, but we didn't like them. So, and because they were hometown boys, Fuller and Golden, the people kind of liked them, obviously. So we figured out, me being the heels, me and the Heavenly Bodies enlisted Kevin Sullivan and his goddamn accomplice, the Tasmaniac, who was just a heel that he brought in as part of his band of freaks. He wasn't Taz then. That came later. And Brian Lee was on our side, right? Or was on their side? Where was Brian in that? Brian Lee was still a babyface. Yes.
Babyface, yeah.
Who was our other guy? Killer Kyle. My bodyguard, Killer Kyle, against the Rock and Roll Express and Brian Lee, who were stone cold baby faces, and then the Stud Stable, who had agreed to team with them to get even with us. And Bullet Bob Armstrong was the referee. And the reason why we did that was so that we could blow off the program where the Rock and Roll and Brian Lee kind of went over and had their moment of glory. But then the Stud Stable could turn back completely heel by turning on the Rock and Roll Express and leaving them and Brian Lee to be fucking beaten and punished by us. And that's when Bullet Bob has to get back involved physically even though he's been the commissioner. And that's when we fucking chain him up to the cage where he was, because the deal was 5-on-5 and you have to handcuff all members of one team to the cage. So finally the Rock and Roll triumphed when Ricky Morton was smarter than everybody else and the heels all get handcuffed. Well, then the referee starts unhandcuffing the people that have been handcuffed, and he starts with the Stud Stable, who then grab the keys and throw them at us and leave the baby faces helpless. and leave the ring. So then obviously Bob's got to make a big comeback, and then we got him and we handcuffed him like on the cross, crucified over the ropes onto the cage, and I whacked him about 35 times with the tennis racket, and actually legitimately not on purpose, but I think it was because he was strapped up in that crucified position like that, and it separated his sternum. It wasn't my racket shots. I maintain that to this day, but he had cracked sternum out of it. And they took him to the hospital. And people were trying to climb the cage. We had guys trying to get in. We had people trying to get in. Everybody was in chaos. And then we actually called the ambulance and had them pull in the building and take Bob to the hospital. And that was then 3 months later after the program where his sons came in to try to get even, and he came back and I had to get in the ring. That's what the money back stipulation was about. At the big event in Knoxville, if Bullet Bob did not only beat me one-on-one, but send me to the same hospital in the same ambulance that I sent him to, he would refund the money of every man, woman, and child that paid to see the match. And so people knew they were either going to see me go to the hospital in an ambulance or it was going to be free because they believed Bullet Bob. So we drew 3,000 fucking people, which was pretty good for the fat manager and the retired commissioner on top.